This is a video that I have wanted to do for quite some time now, and that is to kind of break down differences in lenses. In this first part, I'm really going to stay fairly general. I hope that doesn't annoy anybody. I'm not going to really talk specifics about which lens is a good lens and which lens is not a good lens. I'm really just going to kind of give you some background and basis for making judgments about a lens in general. And I think we can kind of break down the differences in a lens into three areas: the build quality of a lens, the image quality of a lens, and the feature set of a lens. Now, all three of those overlap slightly. Some of the features may affect the build quality may affect the image quality, but I'm going to try to separate them into three distinct pieces and keep that as clean and kind of succinct as possible. Let's start with the kit lens. And when I say the kit lens, I mean the 18 to 55 lens that comes with most entry-level DSLRs. This one happens to be the Canon. This one also happens to be the newer STM lens. But let's take that out of the equation for a second and just say, all right, we're talking about the lens that comes bundled with the camera most of the time, and it doesn't really matter if we're talking about Canon or Nikon. So the build quality is okay. You know, it's almost all plastic construction except for the glass. And even the lens mount, where it mounts onto the camera, is plastic as well. And it feels nice, especially the STM. It feels quite solid. It's a little bit better. Full-time manual focus if you're half pressing the shutter button. We're not going to get too detailed right now. But, it's not meant to last forever. It's certainly kind of just a lens to get you started. And it's not a bad lens, especially the STM if we're talking specifically about Canon, but it's also not a very exciting lens. So that's kind of a good example of your entry-level lens. Let's move up a little bit and talk about something like the Canon 70-300 lens. And now we're talking about a more expensive lens, and I don't want to talk too much about price, but every once in a while I'll mention it. Selling for about $400. This thing is a little bit harder to $250, the STM version, and the non-STM version I think sells for about $150. So we got metal construction now here on the lens mount, a lot sturdier, and this part is all, not all, but parts of this are metal, or metal at least underneath some plastic. Nice big focus ring, zoom ring, focus ring. It has USM, which is the ultrasonic motor. It's not the true ultrasonic motor though, because it doesn't offer full-time manual focus. It is kind of quasi-ultrasonic, even though it has that logo on there. So a little bit nicer, and also a little bit sharper than the kit lens. Well, let's go extreme and talk about something that costs a lot more and is a lot heavier. But you can see that this thing is built pretty much like a tank, and that's true of this other L-class lens I have here. These are almost solid metal construction. They also offer weather sealing. There's a little thin rubber seal back here, so when it's seated or mounted on your camera, it is weather sealed. It is built to withstand some bumps and bangs. These are meant to be used by professionals who are on the go, working hard. And I don't want to say be careless with your gear, but certainly things happen when you're using stuff day in, day out, whereas occasionally this is made for more of your occasional use. It also wouldn't be terrible to replace this. So, main differences, kind of the build quality, plasticky to metal, the solidness of the construction, the materials used. And now here's where we can start to blend into that feature set a little bit, the quality of the glass used and the amount of glass used. You can see in this one that we have a huge amount of glass. More glass is simply letting in more light, and not only is it the size of the glass, but it is the quality of the glass. I don't know if you've ever put on a really nice pair of sunglasses. Really nice, expensive pairs of sunglasses are often like you're not wearing anything at all. The sky is just a little bit darker. And that is really nice. Same with these lenses. So, that was build quality. Now, let's talk a little bit about image quality differences between these. So, in general, the more you pay for a lens, the sharper it's going to be. The more detail it's going to be able to capture, or I shouldn't say capture, pass on to the sensor. The sensor's doing the capture. If you're using a cheaper lens, it's just not able to resolve at that high detail, and you get a little bit of blurring that is passed on to the sensor. Now, we don't want to get into pixel peeping discussions here. But usually the more you pay for a lens, the sharper it's going to be. There are exceptions to that if that lens gives you feature sets, or if you're buying a prime. And I've talked about this in my other videos. Primes are an excellent value. I have one example here of a very good value prime. This is the 51.4. The 51.8 is very good as well. So obviously a prime lens isn't zooming in or out. And so the construction can be simpler with less moving parts. Less moving parts, it's just easier to make and cheaper to make. And you get less distortion because you don't have to zoom and you don't have to make the glass all line up perfectly as it zooms in or out. So for about $300 you could get a 51.4 that rivals the sharpness of, say, a more expensive lens. I don't want to say it quite rivals the sharpness of this because this is a $2,000 lens. So this is one of the sharpest lenses out there you can buy. The other prime I have here is the 85. But this is as sharp as some really nice L glass that you can pay a lot more money for, and it's a good savings. The 51.8 is a savings as well. It's not quite as sharp, and it's only $110, so the build quality there isn't amazing. But in general, it's one of the reasons why I really like prime lenses. They can give you this nice, sharp image quality for a really good savings, or really nice savings. Along with sharpness comes color rendition, and this is one of the areas where I see a huge difference between your entry and mid-level lenses and your higher-end professional level lenses. On the Canon side, we're talking about L-class lenses again. What I mean when I talk about color rendition is just the kind of the colors, the richness, the vibrancy that is captured by these professional level lenses is noticeably different straight out of the camera versus your entry and mid-level cameras. Another difference is the amount of distortion and chromatic aberration, and especially on cheaper lenses that zoom in and out. As I was talking about build quality and having to make these pieces work, and it also depends on the range, the focal length range of the lens. But in general, on cheaper lenses, you're going to get some distortion. That's either kind of a bulging at the wide end of your image or a pincushion effect, both of which can be corrected in post-processing in Lightroom. And I know professional photographers that wander the world using a lens like an 18-200, which is very convenient, but you suffer a lot of distortion because you've packed a huge range into that lens, and generally I'm not a fan of those. The 18-105 and the 18-135 are about as large a range as I like to see. And the convenience is nice, but you make those sacrifices, and so you suffer some distortion. Again, prime lenses, less is moving, less distortion because they've been set up to shoot at that focal length and avoid distortion at that focal length. Unless you're talking about very wide primes, and then you're starting to get distortion you probably want, bending out the outer edges of the frames like a fisheye effect. Along with distortion, I mentioned chromatic aberration. This is some purple fringing. It usually is displayed as purple fringing along areas of high contrast. Let's say you're shooting some flowers against the sun. Right along those edges where the flower stops and the sky begins, on cheaper lenses you're going to see some purple chromatic aberration. Again, this is something you can correct in post, but you can only correct it so much. And it is nice to start with an image that is as high quality as possible. All right. Now, let's touch on just a few kind of general basics about lenses. I'm going to talk about Canon since this is what's sitting in front of me. The first is EF versus EFS. That is a big price differentiator often. EFS lenses are only meant to be mounted on crop sensor cameras, like the entry-level Rebels T3i, T4i, T5i. they will not mount on a full frame camera like a 5D Mark III. The glass in there isn't large enough to cover the sensor. And so if you were able to mount, and some third parties do mount on a full frame, you're going to get a circular image and the outer corners are going to be completely black because it wasn't able to capture it. So EFS versus EF. EF lenses are lenses that can be used on either crop, because it's plenty big enough, or full frame. So that's a difference there. I mentioned this a little bit ago, USM, the ultrasonic motor, that usually means quieter and faster focusing, and so when you pay a little bit more, you get that. It oftentimes means full-time manual focus, but it doesn't always mean full-time manual focus. The example being the 70-300 is USM, but it is not full-time manual focus. And what I mean by that is, when the switch is set to autofocus, you cannot rotate the focus ring. It is pushing against the motor. You could, but you would likely damage the motor. You have to switch the switch to manual focus to do that. On a higher end lens that allows full-time manual focus, right now the switch is in AF, but I can still move the focus ring as much as I want. Why is that a big deal? It's nice to be able to adjust it anytime without bothering to make the switch, and so that's why you see that on higher end lenses. What else do I need to talk about? Oh, the apertures, and variable apertures and non-variable apertures. So as you know, the 18-55 offers 3.5 to 5.6. That's a variable aperture over the zoom of that lens. That means as you zoom out, as you zoom in and your focal length gets narrower, your aperture, your maximum aperture allowable to you closes down. Is that a bad thing? Not necessarily, but as you zoom, it does mean that you need to slower your shutter speed or raise your ISO. If you pay a little bit more, oftentimes for a lens, you can get a fixed aperture. Here's the Tamron 28-75, 2.8, and if you look at the end here, oh, actually, this doesn't have any information on the end. It's only on the side here. This is a constant f2.8. As you zoom, your maximum aperture remains at f2.8. That's nice because even as you zoom out, you don't have to lower your shutter speed or increase your ISO. And the longer the zoom, so here's a nice lens, 70-300, very nice, very sharp, a good value at $400, but it does have a variable aperture of 4.5 to 5.6. Nope, sorry, just 4 to 5.6. So as you zoom at 70, the maximum aperture is 4. As you zoom, the maximum aperture becomes 5.6. With a lens like this that costs 4 times the price, you can get a fixed aperture of f2.8. And so as you get in these larger lenses, that offer this maximum aperture that's quite wide, that's very useful in low light situations, and you can find it useful. I don't know what else to say about that. The also has IS, but you know, IS isn't a huge differentiator because you even have IS in this little 18-55. IS is simply the gyroscopes inside that stabilize it and allow you to shoot at slower shutter speeds than you normally would be able to without getting camera shake from your hands moving as you're taking the picture, even just a little bit. And just because it's been sitting here on the table in front of me, I'll talk about it. I don't own this lens. I wish I did. This is an 85-1.2 lens, so it's a maximum aperture of 1.2 that lets in an amazing amount of light. This is one of Canon's nicest lenses for color rendition, but this, as I said at the beginning, this doesn't necessarily mean that it is the lens for everybody. It is not a sports photographer's lens because it's slow to focus, but if you're taking people picture portraits with a full frame camera, this is a really, really nice lens to have, and it is full-time manual focus as well. So I think that was it. I'm sure I left out a good bit because I jumped over here and there a little bit, but that generally gives you some idea of the differences. Now I do have a recommended list of Canon lenses. Down below here will be a link to that. You could certainly ask me a question and I'd be happy to answer it. You can leave a comment down below or find me over on the Facebook page where I would be happy to answer your questions. If you have questions about lenses, value of lenses in general, primes are often excellent values. If a lens is less than, here's a good rule of thumb. I'll stop talking in just a minute. If a lens is less than about $400 and it's not a prime, I probably would not be recommending it. There are a few exceptions to that rule, but generally we have these nice cameras now with really nice sensors in them, and if you're putting a crummy lens on there, you're just kind of taking a step backwards, and you might as well save yourself some money and get a point and shoot. That sounds a little harsh, but it's true. You really are sacrificing some quality with those lower class lenses, and I don't think they're worth your time. You're better off just saving until you can afford the lenses that start to provide some value to you. Alright, I hope this was helpful. Sorry I talked for so long. Leave a comment if you have a question. Find me over on the Facebook page. Thank you.